Just one more month.
You haven't been taking them? I'm saving them.
After the wedding, the guardianship filing goes in immediately. He won't be able to stop it.
For 6 months. You thought I couldn't walk.
Everything I did, nothing I know!
You were building a cage.
For 6 months, Elton Briggs trusted the woman he loved. Every morning, she handed him 2 pills and a smile. But behind that smile was a secret that could destroy a billionaire and turn a dream wedding into a public nightmare. Before we begin this shocking story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end.
14 years before the morning of the wedding, Elton Briggs signed the papers that started Briggs Peak Capital in a small conference room on the 3rd floor of a building on 2nd Avenue in Seattle. He was 37 years old. He wore a gray flannel shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of running shoes he had owned for 2 years. The attorney on the other side of the table looked at him the way certain people in certain rooms always looked at him, measuring, skeptical, quietly deciding whether he belonged there. Elton did not explain himself. He signed the papers, shook hands, and said one sentence that his longtime assistant, Diane Okafor, still repeated whenever the company faced a hard decision. I don't need you to believe in me today. I need you to believe in me in 10 years. 10 years later, Briggs Peak Capital managed a portfolio of just over $1.1 billion. The main office occupied the 38th floor of Meridian Tower, overlooking Lake Washington. Elton still ran every morning at 5:45 a.m. Along the same route, through Seward Park, that he had run when he had nothing. He still ate breakfast at the same diner on Rainier Avenue South, counter seat, black coffee, whatever the special was. He still wore plain clothes to the office most days. He did not own a watch worth more than $60. He did not drive anything that would make anyone look twice. He was a black man, 51 years old, with a straight back and hair going silver at the temples. He had the kind of quiet that people sometimes mistook for shyness until they sat across from him in a negotiation and realized it was something else entirely. He had spent his whole life building things that lasted, and the one rule he had never broken was this: real power does not need to announce itself. The one thing he always carried was a small navy blue tie clip engraved, with his initials on the back, E.T.B. He had worn it the day he used his family's savings to buy the first property in East Tacoma that started everything. He wore it every time he needed to remember where he came from. It was not expensive. It did not look like much. That was exactly the point. The woman Elton was engaged to marry was named Sophia Lennox. She was 39 years old, sharp-featured. With dark hair she wore pulled back during business hours and loose in the evenings. She dressed impeccably, always pressed, always precise, the kind of woman who looked like she had never been caught off guard in her life. She had a Georgetown law degree, 7 years at a D.C. financial consulting firm, and a smile that could make a room feel like she had personally decided to light it up. She had moved to Seattle 3 years earlier. She and Elton had met at a charity dinner in February. She was intelligent, composed, and knew exactly how to sit beside a powerful man without ever looking like she was trying to. She had also, in the 8 months since his accident, become the person who handled almost everything. The accident happened on a wet September morning. Elton slipped on the outdoor wooden stairs after his run, fractured his right kneecap on the edge of the step. Surgery, immobilization, 2 months of standard recovery. And then, the pills. White, small, unremarkable. Given to him every morning and every evening by Sophia, always with a glass of water, always with the same calm voice. The doctor said these help with inflammation. Don't skip them. Month 1, he needed a cane. Month 2, a walker. Month 3, a wheelchair. Elton told himself it was the injury. The doctors said some recoveries were nonlinear. He was tired, he was in pain, and he trusted the person taking care of him. But there were moments, small, easy to dismiss, when something felt wrong in a way he could not name. The morning Sophia suggested he might want to step back from the daily calls because his voice sounded strained. The afternoon she mentioned, very gently, that the board had expressed concern and that perhaps having her join the weekly briefings would take the pressure off. The evening she placed a set of documents on his bedside table, medical authorization forms, she said, insurance paperwork, and left a pen beside them, while he was half asleep and trusting and not reading carefully enough. He signed them, and the man, who had spent 14 years making every decision about his own company, slowly stopped making decisions at all. Not because anyone took them away loudly, because someone moved the ground under his feet 1 inch at a time and called it care. Theo Quincy had worked as Elton's driver and personal assistant for 4 years. He was 29 years old, medium build, always wore a navy polo, and kept one earbud in while he drove. He was the father of a 3-year-old boy named Jordan. His wife Keisha was 7 months pregnant with their second child. He owed 1 month's back rent on their apartment in Renton. He had $412 in savings. He had every reason in the world to keep his head down, do his job, and say nothing. But Theo had seen something like this before. Not the pills, not the legal maneuvering, but the shape of it. The slow disappearance of a strong man inside a relationship that looked, from the outside, like love. He had watched it happen to his father over 6 years when he was a teenager. He remembered the exact morning he walked into the kitchen and saw his father sitting at the table staring at the wall, not angry, not sad, just gone. Already gone. And nobody had done anything, because it had happened so gradually that by the time anyone thought to say something, the man they were trying to save had already stopped recognizing himself. Theo was not going to watch that happen again. He had started noticing things 3 months earlier. Small things. The way Sophia always positioned herself between Elton and his phone when certain calls came in. The way she summarized conversations for Elton afterward in ways that consistently shifted the framing. The names of companies he did not recognize appearing in the financial news feeds he monitored for Elton, buying into Briggs Peak Capital in quiet increments. Nothing large enough to trigger reporting requirements, but consistent. Steady. Organized. He had not said anything yet. He was not sure enough. He needed more. He got more on a Tuesday evening in late November. He was pulling the car around to the garage when he heard Sophia's voice through the kitchen window, which was cracked open 2 inches. Her tone was nothing like the voice she used when Elton was in the room. It was flat, impatient, and very precise. I told you already. After the wedding, the guardianship filing goes in immediately. With the medical records we have, and the board recommendation already in place, approval comes fast. He won't be able to contest it. By the time he understands what's happening, it will already be done. Theo sat in the dark of the garage for 7 seconds. He counted them. He felt his heart beating in his ears. Then he took out his phone and opened the voice memo app. He held it toward the window for the remaining 43 seconds of the call. 43 seconds. Enough. He sat in the garage for another 10 minutes after she hung up, not moving, thinking about Keisha and Jordan and the baby coming and the rent they owed and the job he could not afford to lose. He thought about all of it very clearly and honestly. And then he thought about his father sitting at that kitchen table, already gone, and nobody had done anything. He opened a text to Elton's private number, the one Sophia did not have, and typed 4 words. Need to talk. Tonight. Alone. They met in the small study at the end of the hallway at 11:23 p.m. Door closed, lights low. Theo set his phone on the desk and played the recording. Elton listened without moving. When it ended, the room was completely quiet. The clock on the shelf ticked. The HVAC hummed somewhere above the ceiling. Elton looked at Theo for a long moment. You could lose your job over this, he said. I know. Keisha's due in 2 months. I know. Then why? Theo looked down at the desk, then back up. Because I already stayed quiet once. I watched someone disappear, and I didn't do anything. I'm not doing that again. Elton held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then he reached into the back of his desk drawer and placed a small metal box on the surface between them. Inside, 44 white pills, lined up in careful rows. I've been keeping them for 3 weeks, Elton said. I didn't know what they were yet. I just knew something was wrong. He had started hiding the pills after the evening He overheard Sophia on the phone telling someone that the recovery timeline is right on schedule. He had not understood what that meant, but the phrase had lodged in him like a splinter, and the next morning, when she handed him his medication, with that same calm smile, and watched him swallow, he had let the pill slide under his tongue instead of down his throat. When she left the room, he had dropped it into the metal box, an old business card case from the early days of Briggs Peak, back when he printed his own cards and carried them to every meeting he could get. He had kept the box for years, as a reminder of where he started. That night, without planning it, it became something else. 44 mornings and evenings of pretending. 44 pieces of evidence. I need a doctor, Elton said. Not Peralta. Someone outside her network. And I need Brendan O'Shea tonight. Theo nodded once and picked up his phone. Dr. Amara Voss arrived at 12:47 a.m. Through the back entrance. She was a friend of Brendan O'Shea from their undergraduate years at Howard, now practicing internal medicine at a private clinic in Bellevue. She carried a compact medical bag and a testing kit that looked more like a travel case than hospital equipment. She crushed one pill, applied reagent, and waited 90 seconds. Cyclobenzaprine, she said. High-dose muscle relaxant. This is not an anti-inflammatory. It's not a recovery medication. She set the test strip down and looked at Elton directly. Taken consistently over several months, it doesn't damage muscle tissue outright. It disrupts neuromuscular signaling. The muscles don't atrophy the way they would from disuse. They lose the ability to activate on command. It's gradual. It mimics a degenerative condition. Any physician reviewing the chart without knowing what to look for would call it a natural complication of the original injury. The room was very still. If I stop now, Elton said, is there recovery? If the nerve pathways haven't been permanently disrupted, yes. But you need movement, circulation, and time. And you need to stop taking this immediately. Elton looked at the 44 pills in the metal box. He looked at them for a long time. That box, he had bought it at a stationery store on Pike Street back when he was 26 years old, still living in a studio apartment, running numbers on a laptop balanced on a folding table. He had carried his self-printed business cards in it to every meeting, every coffee, every cold call. When Briggs Peak finally had real offices and real business cards, he had kept the box in his desk because it reminded him of what it felt like to have nothing except belief in what he was building. And tonight, with no plan and no forethought, he had used it to carry the evidence that might save his life. Thank you, he said to Dr. Voss. Then he looked at Brendan O'Shea, who had been sitting in the corner chair listening, with his legal pad open and his expression giving away nothing. How long do I have before the wedding? Elton asked. Brendan checked his watch. 22 days. Is that enough? Brendan looked at him steadily. I'll need the kitchen security footage and a financial investigator by morning. You'll have both. Brendan closed his legal pad. Then it's enough. The financial investigator's name was Curtis Albright. 53 years old, gray hair, thin glasses, a voice like a man, who had spent 30 years explaining complicated things to people who did not want to hear them. He arrived at 8:15 a.m. the following morning with a laptop and a portable hard drive. He sat across from Elton and Brendan in the study, with the curtains half drawn, and laid out what 8 days of investigation had uncovered. 5 shell companies had been acquiring shares of Briggs Peak Capital over the previous 6 months. Small purchases staggered across different weeks, never enough in a single transaction to require public disclosure. Individually, they looked like unrelated institutional investors. Collectively, they represented a 4.3% stake in the company. All 5 companies traced back to a single holding group registered in Delaware 8 months ago, 3 months before Elton's accident. The signatory on the holding group's formation documents was a name Elton did not recognize. But the notarized authorization letter attached to the filing carried a signature he knew very well. Sophia Lennox. She's been positioning herself to become one of the largest single voting shareholders, Albright said. If you are declared medically incapacitated and she already controls the shares she's accumulated, combined with the financial authorization documents you signed in October, she gains operational control of the company. After the marriage, the guardianship petition locks it in legally. No one on the outside challenges a wife managing her disabled husband's affairs. Elton sat with his hands flat on the desk. The October documents, he said. I thought those were insurance forms. They were also a limited power of attorney covering financial decisions during a period of medical incapacity. It was filed with 3 other documents. The insurance paperwork was on top. The room was quiet for a moment. There's one more thing, Albright said. He turned the laptop screen toward Elton. One of the shell companies has a secondary signatory, someone who also has authorization to act on its behalf. The name on the screen was Warren Holt. Elton looked at it for 3 seconds without speaking. Warren Holt was 55 years old, silver-haired, always the first to shake Elton's hand at board meetings and the last to leave the room. He had been on the Briggs Peak board for 6 years. He had attended Elton's last birthday dinner. He had called 3 times in the past 2 months to check in and express concern about Elton's health and the burden Sophia must be carrying. How long has he been involved? Elton asked. Based on the filing dates, since the beginning. Elton looked out the window at the gray Seattle morning. He thought about Warren Holt sitting at the board table for 6 years, shaking hands, staying late, calling to check in. All right, he said finally. Build the full case. Everything. The house on Queen and Hill continued to look, from the outside, like a home preparing for a celebration. A white tent went up in the garden on day 14. Florists came and went. The wedding planner walked through every room with a clipboard, measuring sight lines and testing the acoustics of the outdoor space. 217 chairs arrived on a truck and were arranged in rows facing a small stage, with 3 steps leading up to it and white flowers banked along both sides. Elton attended every planning meeting from his wheelchair. He asked about the seating chart. He nodded at the floral decisions. When the wedding planner said, with practiced warmth, "You'll look wonderful up there. We've built the ramp on the left side, so everything will be smooth for you," he smiled and said thank you. Sophia was at her best during those 3 weeks. Attentive, organized, radiating the particular warmth of someone who believes the finish line is in sight. She brought the morning pills, with her usual unhurried calm, handed him the water glass, and watched him swallow. She discussed the guest list over dinner. She arranged for his suit to be adjusted, tailored, she specified, for comfort when sitting for an extended period. She spoke to 2 board members who came for a pre-wedding dinner and expressed, over wine, that she hoped the company transition would be as smooth as possible for Elton's sake. The board members nodded sympathetically. Every morning, 30 seconds after Sophia left the room, Elton rolled to the bathroom and deposited the pills into the sink. He watched them dissolve and said nothing. Every afternoon, in the part of the garden not visible from the kitchen windows, Theo stood a few feet away, while Elton held the back of the stone bench and forced his legs to carry weight they had been chemically taught to forget. The first 3 days, he could not stand for more than 12 seconds, without his knees buckling. Day 7, 28 seconds, 1 step. Day 11, 8 steps without holding anything. Day 16, the full length of the garden path, and back, slow and uneven but continuous. On day 19, he stood at the bottom of the 3 garden steps near the side wall, and looked at them for a long moment. "If I fall on those stairs in front of 200 people," he said, "this will be a very different story." "You won't fall," Theo said from behind him. "You don't know that." "No, but I know you've been getting up every time you do." Elton put his hand on the railing and stepped up. His right leg shook badly on the 2nd step. He gripped the rail harder and kept going. 3rd step. He stood at the top, breathing through his nose, heart pounding against his ribs. "That's the stage," Theo said quietly. "That's the stage," Elton agreed. On day 20, Brendan called with the final confirmation. The kitchen security footage was clear and authenticated. The financial records were packaged. Dr. Voss's laboratory report was signed and notarized. The screen behind the wedding stage had been arranged, with the A/V technician, a man Brendan had hired independently, not the wedding planner's crew. Warren Holt's connection to the shell company had been documented and would be included in the package delivered to the full board simultaneously with the presentation. "When you stand up," Brendan said, "take your time. Don't rush it. Let everyone see it. That moment is worth more than any document." Elton was quiet for a moment. The board members, he said. All 6 will be there. All 6. Front row, left side. The 3 lead investors are center. Warren Holt is seated at the end of row 1, right side. He'll try to leave when the screen comes on. There will be 2 people near the exits who will make sure the presentation finishes before anyone goes anywhere. After the call ended, Elton sat alone in the study, with the lights off, and the city of Seattle going dark outside the tall glass windows. He opened the desk drawer and took out the metal box. Empty now, the pills had been transferred to Dr. Voss's lab weeks ago. He turned the box over in his hands, felt the weight of it. He had carried it for 22 years. First as hope, then as evidence, now as something he did not have a word for yet. He set it down on the desk and picked up the navy tie clip, held it between his thumb and forefinger. E.T.B. on the back. He put it in his jacket pocket for the morning. The day arrived gray and cold, the way Seattle mornings arrive in December. Not dramatic, just honest. Light came through the bedroom windows at 6:48 a.m. Without announcement. Elton was already awake. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his legs for a while. He thought about 14 years of early mornings. He thought about the studio apartment and the folding table and the self-printed business cards. He thought about the 14 years between, that room and this one, everything he had built, every person who had told him he was asking for too much. He thought about Warren Holt shaking his hand at board meetings for 6 years. At 7 a.m., the door opened, and Sophia walked in wearing a white robe, hair already done, face composed and flawless. She was carrying the pill bottle and the glass of water. Her smile was the same smile it had always been, warm, practiced, certain. "Good morning," she said. "Today's the day." "It is," Elton said. She shook 2 pills into her palm and held them out to him, with the water. He took them, placed them in his mouth, drank, tilted his head back the way she expected. She watched until she was satisfied. "I'll see you out there," she said. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Don't be nervous. Everything is ready." When the door closed, he walked to the bathroom, spit the pills into the sink, and watched the white powder spiral down the drain. Last time, he said to no one. He put on the suit, the one tailored for a man who would spend the ceremony sitting. He stood in front of the mirror and straightened the jacket. He reached into the pocket and took out the navy tie clip, held it for 3 seconds, and pinned it to his lapel. He did not look like a man who was going to stand up. That was the point. At 3 p.m., guests filled the 217 chairs in the garden. The 6 board members sat in the front row on the left. The 3 lead investors occupied the center. At the far right end of row 1, Warren Holt sat, with his silver hair combed back, and his expression carrying the particular look of a man who believes the world is about to arrange itself correctly. Sophia stood at the top of the stage in a white dress, composed and luminous, exactly as planned. At 3:08 p.m., the music changed. Every head turned. Theo pushed the wheelchair slowly down the white carpet. Elton sat with his hands resting on the arms of the chair, looking straight ahead. The wheelchair stopped at the base of the ramp beside the stage steps. The officiant smiled. "We are gathered here today." "I need a moment," Elton said. His voice was calm. The microphone on his lapel carried it cleanly across the garden. 217 people went completely still. He placed both hands on the arms of the wheelchair. He pushed himself up. The silence that followed was not like ordinary silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people simultaneously stops breathing. Someone in the middle rows made a small, involuntary sound. A chair shifted. A wine glass was set down on a table somewhere, without a sound. Elton stood, not perfectly straight, not without effort, but standing, on his own 2 feet, in front of everyone Sophia had positioned to watch her win. He looked at her. Her face had gone completely white. The smile was gone. For just 1 second, under the composure and the white dress and the 8 months of perfect execution, something else appeared. Not fear, exactly. Something colder than fear. The look of a person watching a building they constructed with great care begin to fall. For 6 months, Elton said, his voice steady, I believed I was losing the use of my legs because of my injury. He took 1 step toward the stage, then another. The garden was so quiet that his footsteps on the stone path were audible. I believed the doctors. I believed the medication. I believed the person who handed me that medication every morning and told me it was helping. He reached the base of the 3 steps. He put his hand on the railing. First step. His right leg shook. He held the rail and kept moving. Second step. Slower. Both hands on the rail. He did not stop. Third step. He stepped onto the stage and turned to face the crowd. The truth is, I was not getting sick. I was being made sick. Deliberately. Every day. By someone who needed me in that chair. At the front row, Brendan Osei nodded once toward the back of the garden. The A/V technician pressed a key. The screen behind the stage came to life. Kitchen camera footage. Date stamp, October 6th, 9:14 p.m. Sophia standing at the counter, 2 pill bottles, pouring from one into the other, with the unhurried efficiency of someone performing a routine task. No nervousness. No hesitation. Her phone to her ear. Gasps moved through the crowd like a wave breaking. Then the financial documents. 5 company names. A Delaware holding group. Formation date, 8 months ago. The notarized authorization letter. The signature at the bottom. Then Dr. Voss's laboratory report. Cyclobenzaprine. High dose. Long-term administration. Effects consistent with induced neuromuscular suppression. And then, the document that made Warren Holt's face go gray. The secondary signatory page from the shell company filing. His name. His authorization. His involvement, dated from the beginning. Holt pushed back his chair. One of Brendan's people appeared at the end of the row, without a word, and stood where the aisle met the exit. Holt sat back down. Elton let the screen run for 10 seconds after the last document. He looked out at the board members, at the investors, at the 200 faces he had known and worked with and trusted. Then he looked at Sophia. She was not white anymore. She was something else entirely. Color rising in her face, hands at her sides, the composure gone, and something raw and furious rising in its place. "This is not," she started. "I'm not finished," Elton said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You want to stand there and show people a video? You fell. You were sick. I took care of you. That's what I did." Her voice was perfectly controlled for the first 5 words, and then it was not. "Everything I did was for you. Every decision I made was, because you couldn't make them yourself. You want to turn that into a crime? The laboratory report. I don't know anything about any laboratory report. I gave you what the doctor prescribed. I'm not a pharmacist. If Peralta made an error." Glenn Peralta's clinic was incorporated 4 months before my accident, Brendan said from the front row, standing now. "The incorporation documents list you as a founding investor." The garden was completely still. Sophia looked at Brendan, then at the board members, then at the investors. She looked at all of them with an expression that was beyond anger. It was the look of someone who had spent 8 months building something perfect and was watching it come apart in a sequence she could not stop and could not reverse. "I want a lawyer," she said. Her voice was flat and stripped of everything else now. "That's a good idea," Elton said quietly. "You think this is over?" She looked at him directly, and what was in her face now was not grief, and it was not remorse, and it was not even the shock of being caught. It was something that looked like the purest, most uncomplicated form of fury at a plan that had not worked. "You have no idea what you've thrown away. I was building something. For both of us. You were building a cage," Elton said. "You just put very comfortable furniture in it." 2 Seattle Police Department officers walked through the garden gate at 3:41 p.m. Brendan had coordinated their arrival 40 minutes before the ceremony began. They moved quietly along the side of the seated guests. Sophia watched them come. She did not move. She did not run. She stood in her white dress at the top of the stage and watched them cross the garden toward her with the expression of a person who still, even now, could not fully accept that the outcome had changed. When the officer read her rights, she said nothing. When they walked her toward the gate, she turned her head once and looked back at Elton. Not pleading, not sorry, just looking, the way you look at something you still want and cannot have and will not stop wanting. The gate closed. Warren Holt was escorted from his seat 11 minutes later. Immediate, December 20th, Sophia Lennox was booked at the King County Correctional Facility at 4:57 p.m. on charges of intentional bodily harm, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate asset theft. Her bail hearing was set for December 23rd. Her attorney, the third one she contacted after the first two declined the case, entered a plea of not guilty on all counts. Dr. Glenn Peralta's medical license was suspended by the Washington State Medical Commission at 6:30 p.m. the same evening, pending a full investigation. The commission's preliminary review, based on Dr. Voss's lab report and the timeline of Peralta's prescriptions, noted that the pattern of treatment was inconsistent with any recognized standard of care for the documented injury. Warren Holt resigned from the Briggs Peak Capital Board of Directors at 8:14 p.m. via a two-sentence email to the board secretary. He did not provide an explanation. His attorney issued a statement 2 days later saying his client denied any knowledge of wrongdoing and was cooperating fully with investigators. Organizational, January through February. On December 27th, the full Briggs Peak Capital Board convened an emergency session. All financial authorization documents signed by Elton during the period of documented medication interference were voided. The limited power of attorney filed in October was formally withdrawn and referred to the King County Prosecutor's Office as part of the criminal case. The 5 shell companies were ordered to divest their Briggs Peak shares by court injunction filed January 9th. The total position, acquired at a blended cost of approximately $3.1 million, was liquidated at market over 4 trading days. The proceeds were frozen pending civil litigation. On January 14th, Brendan Osei's office filed a civil suit naming Sophia Lennox, Glenn Peralta, Warren Holt, and the Delaware Holding Group as co-defendants. Counts included intentional infliction of physical injury, financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and civil conspiracy. The lead plaintiff was Elton Briggs. The second plaintiff was Diane Okafor, who had been systematically excluded from a series of company decisions during the months Sophia served as interim administrative support. 3 investors who had been approached by Warren Holt about restructuring options in the event Elton became permanently incapacitated came forward voluntarily to Brendan's office in January. Their statements formed the basis of an additional count of investor fraud. Systemic. April. On April 14th, the Washington State Medical Commission adopted a new mandatory reporting rule. Any physician prescribing a medication outside the documented treatment protocol for more than 60 consecutive days, without a second opinion consultation, was required to file a supervisory review form. The rule applied to all prescriptions involving controlled muscle relaxants, sedatives, and neuromuscular agents. The rule was not given an official name in the Commission's published guidelines. In the informal language that spread through medical offices and hospital corridors across the state, it was called the Briggs Rule. Elton Briggs did not sell Briggs Peak Capital. He had considered it, in the months before the accident, in the way that certain men consider laying down something heavy after carrying it for a very long time. He had built enough. He had proven enough. Maybe it was time to let someone else carry it. He did not feel that way anymore. In March, 4 months after the wedding, that was not a wedding, he ran 3 kilometers around Green Lake for the first time since the accident. It was not fast. It was not clean. His right leg still sent him warning signals on the downhill sections, and his form was nothing like it had been at 50. But he ran the full loop, alone, at 6:15 in the morning, when the mist was still low on the water, and the park was empty except for a few dog walkers, who did not know who he was. When he finished, he stood at the water's edge for a while and looked out at the lake. In April, he announced the formation of the Briggs Peak Foundation with an initial capitalization of $3.4 million from his personal funds. The foundation's 2 mandates, legal and financial support for victims of what the filing documents termed asset isolation schemes targeting individuals during periods of medical vulnerability, and professional development scholarships for young people of color entering careers in finance and law from communities that historically lacked access to those networks. 11 of the investors who had been present at the December ceremony signed contribution pledges within the first week of the announcement. The total committed by May, $7.8 million. I spent 6 months in a wheelchair, Elton said at the foundation's launch event, in the same garden where the white tent had stood. "I don't want the next person to spend longer because they didn't know they had the right to fight back." 6 months later, June, Theo Quincy was promoted to Director of Operations and Security at Briggs Peak Capital in February, with a salary of $96,000 annually. His son Marcus James Quincy, named partly for a great-uncle and partly, Theo would admit years later, over a beer, for a man he had watched get back up more times than should have been possible, was born on February 3rd, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, loud from the first minute. The Quincy family closed on a 3-bedroom house in Kent in May. The back rent was long paid. Theo still drove Elton to the office on Monday mornings. Neither of them talked about the garage and the 43 seconds very often. They did not need to. Dr. Amara Voss joined the Washington State Medical Commission's advisory panel for the new mandatory reporting protocols in March. She helped draft the language of what became the Briggs Rule. She described the process, in a later interview, as the most useful thing I have ever done, with a 90-second test result. Brendan Osei won the civil judgment on May 11th. The court awarded Elton $2.3 million in compensatory and punitive damages from the named defendants collectively. The criminal trial for Sophia Lennox and Glenn Peralta was scheduled for October. Warren Holt negotiated a cooperation agreement in exchange for reduced charges. His attorney confirmed in a statement that Holt had provided substantial assistance to prosecutors. Sophia Lennox remained in custody after her bail request was denied at the January hearing, the judge citing flight risk based on the scale of the financial scheme. Her attorney filed 3 motions in the spring, all denied. She maintained, in every document and every recorded conversation with her legal team, that she had done nothing wrong, that Elton had needed her, that everything she did was a form of care, that the jury would understand. Dr. Glenn Peralta lost his medical license permanently on April 19th. He did not contest the ruling. Warren Holt resigned from 2 other corporate boards in January before those boards asked him to. He spent the spring in a house in Scottsdale, according to his attorney, reflecting and preparing for the legal process ahead. On the morning of June 7th, Elton Briggs put on a gray flannel shirt, dark jeans, and a pair of running shoes. He drove himself to Seward Park at 5:40 a.m., parked at the South Lot, and ran the full loop, 4.3 miles, for the first time in 10 months at full distance. When he finished, back at the car, breathing hard and sweating, through the flannel, he reached into his pocket and took out the navy tie clip. Held it in his palm for a moment. Felt the familiar weight of it. He pinned it to the inside of his collar, where no one would see it but him. Then he got in the car and drove back to the office. He had a 7:15 a.m. call with the foundation's first grant recipients. He did not want to be late.